All right, welcome back to the channel, dog. I'm sick of Terence Crawford, man. I like Terence Crawford as a fighter, but dude, Terence Crawford need to come on, man. Ray Robinson tells the truth about Terence Crawford and says Terence Crawford, at least this is my viewpoint, man, or he's got a reason to believe this, that Terence Crawford don't want to fight anybody, man. You're not gonna fight Gary Russell Jr. Dude, what's the excuse for Ray Robinson? But anyway, let's talk about the prima donna actions of Terence Crawford, and that's right, Wool Bag and drink more water. I said prima donna actions of Terence Crawford relative to Ray Robinson, Gary Russell Jr., Sean Porter, or anybody else that wants to fight the guy. Let's talk about that in this video. All right, welcome back to the channel. All right, so we talking about Terence Crawford again. It is what it is, man, but come on. The dude got to fight somebody. And Ray Robinson is the latest dude of many to say, let's fight, bud. We got a beef. We got something we can settle from the amateurs. And Terence Crawford plays prima donna. Let's talk about that, because I know y'all don't want to see this Gary Russell Jr. fight, but Gary Russell Jr. deserves to fight with Terence Crawford as much as some of these other guys do. But Ray Robinson, dude, what's the excuse for Ray Robinson? Let's talk about it in this video. All right, welcome back to the channel. Terence Bud Crawford, my #1 pound for pound fighter in the world. I didn't say pound for pound with a lot of enthusiasm because I'm getting sick of it, man. Pretty much every other time somebody says they want to fight Terence Crawford acts like, who do they think they are? They don't deserve a fight with me. Forget it. No, it's like constant, man. So these particular instances of it, let me explain before I get into the video, right? So Terence Crawford, as we all know, have been beefing back and forth with Gary Russell Jr. that said, look, dude, I'll fight Terence Crawford. I'll fight him at 147 pounds, right? He talks about how he broke Terence Crawford's jaw in the amateurs over, some altercation that they had. And then there's a bunch of back and forth, with guys that were there to witness it. And, all of that stuff, man, that was going on in the later part, like Wednesday through Saturday of last week, right? If you're not familiar with it, go check out their Twitter, go check out their Instagram. They got plenty of videos up going through it, right? Now, I had fun with it. There's not a lot of really great stuff going on in boxing right now, obviously because of the virus. So, hey, man, I had a little fun with it. But throughout every video that I made, or talked about it, or in the live streams that we talked about it, or comment sections on other people's channels when they're doing videos about it, I maintain the same position. Gary Russell Jr., there's nothing wrong with Gary Russell Jr. wanting to fight Terence Crawford. And there's nothing wrong with Gary Russell Jr. going up there to fight Terence Crawford at 147 if he's serious about it and getting the brakes beaten off of him. He has the right to do it. Why shouldn't he be able to challenge himself? Right? They say, you're skipping 3 weight classes, or you're jumping up 4 weight classes. Whatever, man. The dude has so what? If he has the ability to do it, and what's the difference? Especially if there's no fight that you're going to get out of Terence Crawford that you want to see anyway. Like, you know what I mean? So, but anyway, I'm not going to, I don't think Gary Russell Jr. can beat Terence Crawford. I'm not crazy, right? But if Gary Russell Jr. wants to do it, why can't Gary Russell Jr. do it? I might be wrong. Everybody might be wrong. And you never know until you get in the ring and you fight. Upsets happen all the time. Now that's a severe upset, but it is what it is. But but the boxing fans of Terence Crawford and boxing media who probably didn't pay much attention to it at all, nobody's clamoring for Terence Crawford to fight Gary Russell Jr. And why? Because Gary Russell Jr. is a featherweight and Terence Crawford is a welterweight. He's too small. We think we know what the outcome of the fight is going to be, so don't make the fight, right? Fanon, you're crazy. Why are you trying to get Gary Russell Jr. killed? I'm not trying to get Gary Russell Jr. killed. I'm trying to see fights, dude. And if the fact of the matter is that if Manny Pacquiao was a featherweight at one point in time in his career, and he wound up getting up to 147 pounds and beating guys at 147 pounds. He was able to do it. Who am I to say that Gary Russell Jr. doesn't have the right to try to do something that Manny Pacquiao was given the opportunity to do. But obviously, the difference between Manny Pacquiao and Gary Russell Jr. is that he has a promotional company, that being Manny Pacquiao, that would give him plenty of dead meat, plenty of half-dead meat to eat, to kill, and, a lot of, what do you call it, farmer game, right? Where you take somebody hunting, but, the animals you're hunting are in an enclosure and they got nowhere to run, right? Kind of like that, where you're like, Manny Pacquiao moved up to fight Ricky Hatton. Dude, Ricky Hatton was done. Had already gotten mopped up by Floyd. But, whatever. The way he did it, he gets up the weight classes, loses some guys like lost to Eric Morales. And people like, well, if you lose to Eric Morales, how could you ever beat Keith Thurman, right? He lost to Eric Morales, but then he beat Keith Thurman, right? He lost a fight at 130. I do believe that was at 130 with Eric Morales, right? It wasn't at lightweight. I think it was at 130 he lost to Eric at a super featherweight, right? Or junior lightweight, whatever you want to call it, but super featherweight. And some years later, he beat Cotto at 147. So it happens, right? But people's like, no, that's Manny Pacquiao. Manny Pacquiao's super special. That's why he was allowed to do that. We don't want to hear anything about Gary Russell Jr. Okay, fine. What about Ray Robinson? Why not Ray Robinson? Well, how many losses do you have? Terence Crawford talked about Ray Robinson. Oh, wow, how many losses does he have? And, man, dude, he just got a draw with the last guy that you fought. So what do you mean? Ray Robinson is, now see, that's what Ray Robinson said. Ray Robinson says that he was like, look, Bud Crawford doesn't want to fight anybody. He wants the puppet master, Bob Arum. He just wants to do what his puppet master, Bob Arum, tells him to do, and fight fights that are safe, that he can win. And he's like, that's why Terence Crawford's not getting the big fights that he says that he wants to get, because Terence Crawford doesn't really want them. Terence Crawford just wants he wants easy fights that he can win, safe and sound, and that's it, right? So Ray Robinson puts heat on both. Ray Robinson put the blame on both Bob Arum and Terence Crawford. And him saying it, dude's like, okay, how can you argue against that? How can you argue against that? Ray Robinson, people say, well, who is Ray Robinson beat? Ray Robinson is not that good. Ray Robinson, like, okay, yeah. Ray Robinson and Aegis Kalvanakis. What's the difference? Ray Robinson, Amir Khan. What's the difference? Ray Robinson, Jeff Horn. What's the difference? Ray Robinson, Jose Benavidez. What's the difference? Ray Robinson, Julius Ndungo. What's the difference? Ray Robinson, Felix Diaz. Not Felix Diaz. God dog, what is it? Is it Felix Diaz? The Dominican. What's the difference? Victor Postal, Ray Robinson. What's the difference? Some of those guys might be marginally better than Ray Robinson, but some of them might not be as good. I'll take Ray Robinson over Jose Benavidez. You know what I'm saying? I'll take Ray Robinson right now over Amir Khan. Ray Robinson's a welterweight. What's the problem? Why not Ray Robinson? I'll tell you why not Ray Robinson. The same reason that Guillermo Rigondeaux can't get fights, the same reason that Gary Russell Jr. can't get fights, the same reason that Terence Crawford is so difficult to beat by many people, or anybody that he's fought, actually. Well, that in a combination of the fact that the guy's fighting subpar competition. But I mean, anyway, man, I'm not even going to continue to go down that line of reasoning. Terence Crawford is not going to fight anybody. He's not going to fight anybody next that is better than Ray Robinson. So why is Terence Crawford just out of hand dismissing Ray Robinson, right? But let's just get clear on all the fighters Bud Crawford has said that he will not fight, right? The fighters that he is laughing at the idea of having to fight, or just straight out refusing to fight. He won't fight Sean Porter. He won't fight Ray Robinson. He won't fight Gary Russell Jr. Won't fight any of them. That's 3 Black American fighters, 2 of which are slick southpaws. Those are the ones that I was really going for. Slick southpaws and a roughhousing, awkward Sean Porter. Now, who else is Terence Crawford going to say that doesn't deserve a fight with him? While we sit around and wait for him to take the fight that Bob Arum is going to give him, which will probably be somebody that is not as good as Ray Robinson, right? Even Kell Brook at this point in time. Why would Kell Brook necessarily be a better fight than Ray Robinson is? Kell Brook has lost as well. Kell Brook has had 2 eye sockets broken. So, and I'll take the Kell Brook fight, right? At this point in time and not hold it against him. Not hold it against Terence. Because I just want to see the dude in there with somebody that is legit competition so that we can get rid of the narrative that he doesn't fight anybody. And I can't get rid of the narrative that he didn't fight anybody or that he's fighting a lower level competition when he continually fights lower level competition and then claims that he won't fight lower level competition at the same time. You see what I'm saying? Like, it's like at the same time that he is saying that he refuses, that Gary Russell Jr. is a joke, right? And he ain't trying to hit, that dude's just trying to get fame off my name. Ray Robinson's a joke. Who have you beaten? Look at how many losses you had. This ain't the amateurs. Who are you? I get nothing out of fighting you, right? All of that stuff just to turn around and get a fight against who? You know what I mean? To all of that and to turn around and get an Egas Kalvanakis fight, or to do all of that, turn around and get a Josecito Lopez fight or something like that, dude. Right? Because that's what we're gonna get out of Terence Crawford, man. Now, again, back to the Gary Russell Jr. thing. I can understand why people would say, no, I don't want to see Gary Russell. I don't want to see Gary Russell versus Terence Crawford. I get that. Because if I have to pick the fight for Terence Crawford, it's not going to be Gary Russell Jr. either. If I could pick a fight for Terence Crawford, the fight would be Manny Pacquiao right now. Because I want to see the Errol Spence Jr. versus Danny Garcia fight. And if Terence Crawford could get the Manny Pacquiao fight, he's going to beat Manny Pacquiao. Then we're one step closer to undisputed at welterweight. So that's the fight I would like to see. I would like to see for Terence Crawford next, but that's not a fight that he's going to get, right? I said I'd like to see the Sean Porter fight. Terence Crawford crapped on that and said, nope, not going to happen, right? Sean Porter wasn't trying to make it happen either, right? I would take Keith Thurman. What are the chances of Terence Crawford saying he's really going to fight Keith Thurman? I doubt it. I doubt it. I wish, if nothing else, dude, Terence Crawford should at least say that you want to fight these guys, because the more people, but Ray Robinson got a great point, because the more people that Terence Crawford laughs at and says that he won't fight because they're not good enough competition, and then he turns around and fights somebody else that's not even as good as the people or not as accomplished as the people that he said weren't accomplished enough to fight him. You know what I mean? To call somebody a tomato can, and I'm not saying he's calling them tomato cans, but just assume for a second that he called them, one fighter called another fighter a tomato can. He's like, I'm not going to fight these tomato cans. And then you turn around and fight a tomato can. I mean, how can you respect that? Anyway, but that's my take on the matter. You let me know what you think in the comment section. And with that, I'm out. Peace.